Morning. So we are in the third and final week of our lessons from the book of Hebrews. As I've been saying for the last several weeks, it's an enigmatic and mysterious book. We don't know who wrote it. We don't know who it was written to. We don't know the occasion that bore its writing. We don't even know exactly what it is. It has been called an epistle, but it doesn't really follow the form of an epistle. Is it a diatribe? Is it a sermon? Is it a treatise? It doesn't fit neatly into any one of the ancient categories of writing, but it does have some themes that are clear. The one theme that we've been talking about here for the last 2 weeks is faith. Faith is one of those themes that shows up from the beginning to the end, and faith isn't always easy, but when I say the book's about faith, we all sort of know what I'm talking about. It's easy to explain in at least that way. It fits on a bumper sticker. What's Hebrews about? It's about faith. The other theme that we find from the beginning of Hebrews straight on through to the 12th chapter that we were in today is harder to explain. It doesn't boil down to one word. It doesn't fit on a bumper sticker unless you have a really big bumper. So I thought we would talk about that today. You might know I'm fond of saying this, that if you are in church on August 25th, you are the tip of the spear. Anyone can come to church in the middle of October or the middle of December, but if you are in church at the end of the dog days of summer, then you're ready to dig deep, right? Like 3 of you went yes. The rest of you are going, why am I not at the beach? With everybody else? So to talk about this other theme, this larger theme, we need to start with Plato. Now, Plato is one of the most influential figures the world, and certainly the Western world, has ever known. You may have never studied Plato a day in your life. You may not know the difference between Plato and Play-Doh, but it doesn't matter, because if you grew up in the world, and particularly the Western world, and you drank the water here and you breathed the air, some of your thinking, some of how you see the world and your place in it is influenced by Plato. Plato lived about 400 years prior to Jesus. People were engaging with his work for hundreds and thousands of years later. At the time of Jesus, we know that there were Jewish scholars who were engaging with Plato's work. There's one scholar whose name is Philo of Alexandria, a Jewish guy whose life's work was to meld Jewish theology and Plato's work. A couple hundred years later, there was another movement called the Neoplatonists who sort of revived Platonism, and they deeply impacted some of the most important theologians that set up the basis for what would become classic Christian theology. Theologians like St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, the foundation of their theology came out of Plato's work. So the author to of the book of Hebrews appears, if the author didn't know of Plato intimately, he at least knew, or she, we don't know who it was, so we don't know if it's a he or a she, knew something about the work. And to start talking about the work, if you've ever taken a Philosophy 101 class, you know the first 10 minutes of the first class, the professor brings out this as, what is this? What is it? It's not a trick question. It's a chair. Thank you very much. You guys are great this morning, and we'll see you next week. It's a chair. It's a chair, and it's not a stool. It's not a settee. It's not a bench. It's not a pew. If we had all of those other sitting instruments up here and I said point to the chair, every single one of you would point to this one. If we brought in a 3-year-old member of the St. Mark's Sunday School and said, what's this? The 3-year-old member of the Sunday School is going to say, that's a chair. Everyone knows it's a chair. But what makes it a chair and not a stool or a pew? Well, Plato says this has the essence of a chair. And this is the classic. It has chairness. Philosophy 101. It's chairness. This does not have chairness. It has pewness. A spoon does not have chairness. A spoon has spoonness. What makes this a chair is its essence, its very chairness. Now, this is an actual existing chair, and we know that because I can bang on it and I can sit on it. It exists in the physical universe. And because it exists in the physical universe, we know some things about it. We know that it is not perfect. Nothing in the created universe is perfect. I mean, we figured out after the 8 o'clock service, that these chairs were probably bought in the 1920s here at St. Mark's. So it's been around for almost 100 years. It's pretty good for a chair. But even 100 years ago, when it was first made and bought and brought to St. Mark's, it wouldn't have been perfect in a way that any chair could be perfect. It might have squeaked. It might have been a little too stiff. It might have wobbled a little bit. Certainly, if you went down and looked at it on like the microscopic level, it would have imperfections and flaws, not perfect. Also, because it exists in the physical universe, it degrades. I mean, I'm going to be a little more careful with it now that I know it's a 100-year-old chair, but it wobbles a little bit, just as you would imagine a 100-year-old chair might wobble. There are stains on it. There are places where the finish is more rubbed off than others. It was never perfect, but it's not in the same condition it was 100 years ago because everything in the physical universe degrades. And we all know this because we know how we feel when we get out of bed this morning and we realize that we degrade too, right? The other thing about things that exist in the physical universe is everything that exists has an end date. Now will this chair be here in 10 years? Probably. I can't imagine we would do anything with a 100-year-old chair other than keep it around. Will it exist in 20 years? Maybe. Will it exist in 100 years? Will it exist in 500 years? Someday, this chair will be no more. It'll be broken up, it'll be lost and forgotten, it'll be consumed in a fire. One day, it will no longer be. But that's with things that exist in the physical universe. They're not perfect, they break down, and they end. But what about its chairness? Now, this is where the genius of Plato's system comes from, because he says that there is this realm, the realm of the physical, the realm of the real, but then there is another realm, which is called the realm of the forms. And this other realm, we could almost, he doesn't use this word, but we could almost use this word, a spiritual realm, is where there is, says Plato, a perfect chair. In this realm of the forms, there is a perfect chair that is perfect, that will not degrade or decay, and that will be eternal. This chair shares in it's a shadow of its essence. It reflects dimly the essence of the perfect chair that is above in the realm of the forms, but it does participate in that realm a little bit. Now, when Plato begins his theory of forms, it's a little atheistic, but as he develops it, he then asks the question, well, who made this stuff? Well, we can probably figure out, well, maybe we couldn't anymore, but someone made this chair. A human being made this chair, right? An artisan, a factory produced this chair. And we could probably research that and find out. Everything has a beginning date, but who made the form? And this is where he says, artisans make things here in this realm, in the realm of the forms, there is an artificer, which in Plato's writing then gets written with a capital A. This divine figure who makes the perfect form of everything. And Plato says, why does he make it? The artificer makes it for the good of the universe, for the good of beauty, for the good of us, just for goodness itself. Okay, you got that? Plato's theory of forms. From the very beginning of the book of Hebrews, straight through to today's chapter, the author of Hebrews talks about the temple. There was a temple in Jerusalem. It actually existed. It was the temple in which God was worshipped. It was the one place on planet Earth that God dwelt among his people. God dwelt on earth. And in that temple, it was the one place on earth that was allowed for God's worship to be. God said there's no other places, it's going to be here. Its blueprints were delivered by God for Moses in the wilderness, and he gave the blueprints for the tabernacle. Later, God gave them to Solomon to actually build a stone structure. It had an outer court, it had an inner court, it had an inner sanctum, it had an altar upon which sacrifices were made, a great basin upon which things and people were cleansed to be prepared for God's service. It had an altar upon which incense was offered. It had a table outside the Holy of Holies where bread was to be placed. It had a priesthood, a group of people whose job in life was to function in the temple. It had sacrifices that the priests then enacted. It had a high priest who sort of saw over the whole thing and entered into the Holy of Holies. Real temple in the heavens that has an outer court and an inner court and a holy of holies, that has an altar, that has a great basin. Incense is offered and God is worshipped. And this temple, the temple that is in Jerusalem, is just a shadow. It's just an echo of that. Priesthood is just an echo of the priesthood above. And the high priest in the temple below is just an echo of the high priest above. And who is the great high priest? And all the sacrifices that are made on the temple below are just a shadow of the actual sacrifice that was made by Jesus on the cross. Do you see why lots of people think that the author of Hebrews knew something about Plato and the realm above and the realm below? The temple that is below was made, and because it existed in the physical world, it was imperfect. Now, the temple, probably around the time the book of Hebrews was written, had just finished a multi-decade rebuilding. King Herod, yes, that King Herod, undertook a massive building project, rebuilding almost the whole thing from the ground up. He turned it into one of the great temples of the world, one of the marvels of the world in his day. But as beautiful as we're told it wasn't perfect. It would degrade and decay, and one day it would no longer exist. And they didn't know this at the time. Herod's temple was finished in the year 63. It was destroyed in 70. Didn't last long at all. In fact, you can't even see the place, the footprint, where the temple was. Wiped away. In today's reading from Hebrews that Bonnie read a little bit ago, the lesson begins in the 18th verse of the 12th chapter with, "You have not come to something that can be touched." After the parens, "But you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem." Not the physical Jerusalem, not the Jerusalem in the middle of Israel that you can touch and whose streets you can still walk on. You've come to a heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant. You have not come to something that can be touched. We have come to something that cannot be touched. Our faith is not in a building made of stone that is imperfect, a building made of stone that would decay and fall apart eventually, a building made of stone that would eventually no longer exist. And that's a good thing because that building hasn't existed for 2,000 years. If our faith rested upon that building, how should we that faith? Our faith does not rest on that. Our faith rests on something greater. The end of the first page of the lesson. This phrase, "yet once more," indicates the removal of what is shaken, that is, created things. It's like right out of Plato. So that what cannot be shaken may remain. And so, trust me on this. I made that much shorter than it actually could have been. This is 12 chapters of argument that I've condensed down into a little bit, and we did a thing on Plato. But after this huge, long argument, you see how it doesn't fit on a bumper sticker? You see how it's a little more complicated? After this huge, long, 12-chapter argument, the author of Hebrews finally gets down to therefore. Not that dramatic. Which finished 12 long chapters of going through painstaking bits of the earthly temple and how they correspond to the heavenly temple. When you got to the therefore, you have to imagine the entire group of people who are reading this for the first time went, okay, now what is all this about? Therefore. Therefore what? Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us give thanks. Isn't that great? Let us give thanks. By which we offer to God an acceptable worship, reverence, and awe, for indeed our God is a consuming fire. Therefore, let us give thanks. There are two basic ways of existing in this world. We can exist in fear that we do not have enough. We can exist in fear and feelings of inadequacy that we aren't enough. That we need more stuff. We need to get more stuff. We need to be more. We need to be better looking. We need to be smarter. We need to be whatever. Where we are right now isn't enough. And it's the way of fear and the other way of existence is the way of gratitude. It's realizing that everything we need, we already have. That we have everything that we already need. We even want to give back because of that. It's the way things that, I don't know, that you need to do later today. Well, maybe you need groceries. A time for grocery shopping. In my house, we need groceries. There wasn't much for dinner last night. And maybe you need to answer 10 emails before you hit the office tomorrow. There are things that we are going to need, but in the next 5 minutes, literally in the next 5 minutes, do you need anything? Single thing other than what you already have right here for the next 10 minutes, for the next hour? Do you need anything? For the next little bit, can we pull out of that incessant desire to have more and to be more and just revel in we have everything that we need here? Even though things are degrading, and even though the things around us will have an end date, we have an end date. Everything that we need is right. We may, what we do in this place, may just be a shadow of what is above. But it's a shadow of what is above. What we do here, joy, praise, service is in some way connected to the gratitude and the joy and the praise. That's why every Sunday we gather around this altar, we say, let us join our voices with the angels and the archangels and with all the company of heaven. We join them. If you remember, last week I talked about the Christian martyr, Jonathan Meyer Daniels, and some of his last words before he was martyred. He talked about us joining our faltering voices with the unfaltering voices above. That of Hebrews. And though we join our faltering voices with the unfaltering above, we make one song. Everything we have, everything we need is right here. Therefore, let us give thanks.